why you should always beware that your closest friend could be your worst enemy. A woman named Naomi was walking home alone from work. She was right across her house when she noticed somebody was following her. It was late at night, so she couldn't see what this person looked like, but she noticed that they had their face covered. All of a sudden, she felt a splash of some sort of liquid on her face. Immediately, she starts screaming and ran towards her house and starts banging on the door for her uncle to open since they lived together at the time. As she's banging on the door, she's screaming that her face is burning. Somebody had thrown acid on her face, which permanently disfigured her. I posted the pictures on my Instagram story since it might be too graphic for TikTok. Her uncle called the police and an ambulance came to take her to the hospital. They asked Naomi if she knew anybody that would want to do something like this to her. Surprising enough, she said her friend Mary of 10 years had said she wanted to throw acid on her one time when they fell out. When they questioned Mary, she claimed she didn't remember saying that to Naomi. While Naomi was in the hospital, Mary was texting her acting concerned, so it can possibly be her. Until police noticed something on CCTV footage. The person with her face covered who attacked Naomi was holding a purse that looked exactly like the purse that Naomi's friend always carried around. Part 2 of why you should always beware that your closest friend could be your worst enemy. After noticing on CCTV footage that Naomi's attacker who threw acid on her face was holding a handbag that looked exactly like her friend Mary's, they took Mary back into custody and got a warrant to search her home. In the home, they found the bag, and the bag had damages that were similar to damages made with acid on that kind of material. They found out that Mary did this to her friend because Naomi called her ugly one time, and Mary took that personally. Mary knew that Naomi had dreams of joining the beauty industry. She was and still is a beautiful girl. That one time they fell out, Mary became friends with Naomi again just to get close to her, just to throw acid on her face because she was jealous of her. She premeditated this attack on her friend. Mary never wanted to admit that she did it. She claimed Naomi threw the acid on her own face. Obviously, the judge did not believe that and sentenced Mary 12 years in prison. Ever since the attack, Naomi felt as if she couldn't ever be seen as normal again. She says whenever she goes out in public, people react to her face, which reminds her of what she looks like. It took her a while to gain back her self-esteem, but now she has amazing friends who always remind her of how beautiful she is. Part 2. Story time of the trio that killed their victims and fed them to their neighbors. Two women and one man who were in a love triangle would lure young women to their house by offering them work as a nanny. A lot of these women who were in search for work trying to get the little money would accept the offer and go to the trio's home. They expected there to be a child whom they would get introduced to take care of, but baby were they wrong. When they were in the trio's home, a man would attack them and kill them with a hammer and then cut them up into pieces. After they were done with the murders, one of the women would use the remains of the human flesh and make traditional stuffed meat pastries. Then they would go out on the street corners and sell those meat pastries to people in their community. Motherfuckers was eating their own friends. They didn't feed all of their victims to their neighbors. Sometimes they would eat their victims themselves for lunch or dinner. They claimed human meat was no different than beef. It tasted the same and had the same consistency. So it's like, why should I spend my money on beef if I could just kill somebody and eat them? One of the victims was a 17-year-old mother to an 18-month-old baby. They killed and butchered the mother right in front of the 18-month-old baby. And the next day, they fed the baby pieces of her mother for lunch in a pastry. That way, the baby would never know she was eating her own mother. What they did next to the baby was even worse. Of the trio that killed their victims and fed them to their neighbors. After the trio had killed a 17-year-old mother in front of her 18-month-old baby, then fed the remains of the mother in pastry form to the 18-month-old baby, they took the baby in and raised it as their own. Thankfully, their whole scheme ended when one of the women tried to use a credit card that belonged to one of the victims who was reporting missing near their home. Like, how dumb can you possibly be? When they searched their home, they dug up their garden and found two bodies of a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old woman. When all the news came out about how people in the community had eaten their own neighbors' remains inside these pastries that they had bought from the trio, so many people were upset. Upset ain't even the word. But the man in the trio's brother claimed that he couldn't have done this to the women because his brother was a vegetarian. But eventually, the man and the two women in the trio confessed to their crimes. They said they did what they did because they claimed the women they killed would eventually give birth to thieves and lowlives and claimed they were controlling the population. The man and one woman in the trio were sentenced 71 years in prison and the other woman was sentenced 68 years. And a shocking discovery, the police chief in charge of the investigation discovered that he himself had eaten the murdered women's flesh. I feel like a lot of people undermine the importance of mental illnesses, and this is exactly why they should never be taken lightly. Audie Sanchez was a 33-year-old mother of a 3-week-old baby. She had severe mental illnesses but was never given proper care for them. She started to hear voices in her head and became very paranoid. These voices were telling her that she needed to get rid of her baby because the devil was inside of him. Once she started hearing these voices telling her these things, she tried to admit herself into a psychiatric hospital, but they denied her, sent her home with some medication and told her, hey, you're crazy, but you're gonna have to deal with it by yourself. Audie was aware that these thoughts weren't normal. So when she would feel like she might do something bad to her son, she would give him to her sister. But her sister would give him back to Audie after she thought Audie was good again. Although she knew Audie was having thoughts about harming her own son. She knew about Audie's severe mental illnesses as well. Their whole family did. There were several warning signs, but the baby was never taken out of her care. And this led to a devastating outcome. One night, Audie was staying with her mother and sister after she got in a fight with her baby father. Audie's sister had woken up to some loud screaming. It was Audie screaming after she had cut her son's head off and ate part of his brain. This is part 2 of why you should always take mental illnesses seriously. After Audie Sanchez had decapitated her 3-week-old son and ate part of his brain, she quoted, "I didn't mean to do it. He made me do it," referring to the devil. She first started hearing voices in her head when she took drugs for the very first time. Do not do drugs, kids. I'm telling you, you're gonna end up decapitating somebody. The saddest part about all of this is that this could have been prevented and that baby could have still been alive if people would have taken her mental illness seriously. Literally just 6 days before this happened, she had met with the counselor and told them that she had voices in her head telling her to harm her own baby. The counselor claimed this was her postpartum psychosis, which is when a mother responds negatively to her pregnancy, sometimes feeling like she needs to harm her child. The counselor did report that Audie needed mental evaluation, but the hospital didn't see the severity of the situation because the counselor failed to mention that Audie was hearing voices specifically telling her to harm her own child. Once they evaluated her, they concluded that she just heard voices and had hallucinations. In court, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. This is the time my mom faked her death so she didn't have to take care of me and my siblings. Yes, this girl really faked her death. So at the time, I was 5 and my little brother was 3. It started off with my mom saying that she didn't feel well and she couldn't pick me up from school, so the bus would have to take me home. Well, a few months after, she started getting picked up from our house by this black car. She said that car was picking her up because of her so-called doctor's appointments. And she wasn't able to drive herself because she was too sick. Well, one day, when this car came to pick her up, she never came home. Me and my little brother were sitting around for a couple days waiting for her to come home, but she never came home, and we were young, so we didn't do anything. Eventually, my aunt came over to our house and told my little brother and I that our mom had passed away and that she was cremated and they kept the ashes. So our aunt started taking care of us. Until one day I saw my aunt getting picked up by that same black car. That's when I started to get suspicious of everything and I decided to check these ashes. When I checked, it was flour. Like for part 2. This is part 2 of the time my mom faked her death so she didn't have to take care of me and my siblings. Like I said, my aunt told me that my mom had died and they cremated her and they let her keep the ashes and that she was going to start taking care of us. Me not knowing how long the cremating process actually took at the time since I was so young, I believed her. Until one day I saw my aunt getting picked up by the same black car that my mom used to get picked up by before she died. That's when I decided to check these supposed ashes and it was actually flour. So one day when my aunt got picked up by this black car, I decided to follow her. I didn't have a car. I was 5 years old, so I had to follow them by walking and hiding behind bushes. I was able to follow them up the street, and once they turned the corner, and there I saw my mom standing on the side of the street. That's when I see the car stop and I see my aunt get out and approach my mother. She tells my mom to give her money for covering for her and taking care of me and my little brother. Mom says she faked her death because my dad wasn't in our lives and she didn't want to take care of us anymore. I'm older now and I cut her off completely and I have full custody of my little brother.